and don't no, just do you need to be off at a certain time, or
no, just, I mean, by 12.
oh
I
no, yeah. No, we're probably talking about 11:15 at the longest.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, I can do that.
Says,
That's fine.
11:10, so
that totally works.
And give it a little more here. And so, yeah, I will do a little introduction. You're the executive director, and we'll just use that. And how soon are you going to do the video? You can do whenever you want. It's up to you, but I'm just curious.
It's kind of midway through, I think.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Get my notes here. Ready? Okay, I guess we're ready to go, Renee. Okay, all right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the All Souls Community Forum, coming from All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm Joe Robertson, a member of this church and a member of the Forum Committee. It is a forum that for nearly 80 years has sought out important conversations, promoting critical thinking on the most compelling and challenging issues of our day. Today, we welcome Tricia DeGraff, of the Executive Director of the Academy for Integrated Arts, a public charter school in Kansas City. So public education in Kansas City has been a fascinating exploration of innovation and partnerships with the community. There's a storied history in Kansas City's struggles for equity and opportunity. And Tricia, you've been there at this work every day on Troost Avenue in South Kansas City. So thanks for joining us, and tell us about it.
Oh, good morning. Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen because I do have a slide deck here. Whoops. Okay, you can see that, correct?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. As Joe said, I'm Tricia DeGraff. I'm the Executive Director at Academy for Integrated Arts, and thanks for having me here this morning. I have attended the forum a few times and always really love it and learn a lot from it. So I'm honored to be here this morning and appreciate you taking the time to join me. I have been an educator for over 20 years. I started out as an elementary school teacher in Houston, Texas, and have taught elementary school in Houston and Chicago and Kansas City, Kansas, here in Kansas City, Missouri. And I've also worked in teacher education at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, as a part of the Institute for Urban Education. And I was an assistant teaching professor for 6 years, I believe, and just really believe deeply in the power of public education. And that, I'll share more about that today, just about, that the importance of public education. Academy for Integrated Arts is a charter school here in Kansas City. We're located at 7910 Troost. As many of you might know, right now, Kansas City is about 50% charter and 50% district. Charter schools are public schools. We access federal and state and local funds. The funding situation can get a bit complex, but I won't get into that unless people ask me questions and about that. But not because it's not important, just because it's not what we're focusing on today. But anyway, we were founded in 2012 with 88 students in grades kindergarten through second. The idea behind charter schools, so legislation for charter schools was passed in Missouri in, the late 90s. And the reason behind it, one of the reasons, there's a few different reasons, but one of the reasons for having charter schools is to provide places where innovative things can happen in education. And so our charter school is really focused on arts integration. And oftentimes the arts are marginalized, unfortunately, in many school curriculums in favor of a more narrow focus on reading and math. And so FIA was founded with the idea that we would really double down on the arts, integrate the arts throughout the core curriculum. The premise is that students learn best when they're able to learn academic skills through project work with arts integration, really engaging in the arts as part of the core curriculum. And so children learn through the arts, and I'll show some examples today as well. We have grown one grade level over the last few years, and now we are a pre-K through sixth grade school. And as of right now, we don't have any plans to grow into middle or high school. We are just sticking to the elementary grades of pre-K through sixth grade. We did start out at 5604 Troost, but moved to 7910 Troost in 2016. So if you drive down Troost, you will see it's not a brick building, but a brick red building. That is our building. It used to be a bowling alley many years ago. King Louis East was also a cosmetic company before we purchased it. But at the time that we purchased it to make it into a school building, it was an empty building that had been empty for a few years. And so we renovated it to make it into the school that it is today. And we currently serve 250 students. So our demographics, so any child can come to our school who lives within the boundaries of the Kansas City, Missouri School District. Charter schools do take all children. If we have more children who enroll in the school than we have seats, then we do have to hold a lottery, just because there are limitations related to being able to accommodate all children. So we do have a lottery if we have more students than we have seats. We are many of our students live in poverty, so all of the meals that are served at AFIA are free to students. So that's including breakfast and lunch. That's part of the community eligibility provision program, where all children are able to get free meals at schools based on the poverty level of our overall poverty level of our students. About 8% qualify for special education, and so we do provide special education to students. All charter schools do provide special education to students. At any given time, about 10% of our students are considered homeless. And in terms of student demographics, 85% of our students are Black, 8% white, 3% multiracial, 2% Asian, and 2% Latinx. And we are in the southern part of the city, 7910 Troost. And so that does also, it just gives you some context too, in terms of, I think, our demographics would be very different, or a bit different, if we were in the Northeast, for example. So one of the things I want to be sure to say is there are so many wonderful things going on in schools across Kansas City, in charter schools, in district schools, in private schools. There's amazing things happening across schools here in Kansas City and across our nation. There are also a lot of limitations in education, and there's also a lot of complexities and challenges. And I'm going to speak a little bit about some of those complexities to start with. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we specifically do at Academy for Integrated Arts. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that the unfortunate reality is that schools often reproduce inequities. Oftentimes children are seen through a definite lens, and not all strengths are equally valued in schools. I'm sure many of you, or if not all of you, are familiar with the idea of the school to prison pipeline, and we really set out to disrupt that. I know that my colleagues across the city are setting out to disrupt that school to prison pipeline, because we want children to be in schools that are joyful, where their strengths are seen and they're able to grow those strengths, because children are brilliant, and we have to just provide the space and place for that brilliance to really shine. There was definitely a time in my career, though, I had to really grapple with this idea that I did know that the reality, and I saw it and have, that the reality is that schools reproduce inequities. And so I had to really personally grapple with that and come to terms with, well, how can I make a difference? How can I, and work with others who are working to make a difference, to really make sure that our public school system is not reproducing inequities, and that instead we are ensuring that all children have great education. And so in order to do that, we have to be aware of some of the systematic challenges and history that we have in our country, and we have to really think about how to push against that and how to disrupt. And I think oftentimes just like how many of us were raised in schools, there's many challenges with that. So Maxine Green, who was a philosopher and educator, and somebody who has written many things that have inspired me. One of this quote from her really gets at this idea that when you know, sometimes what we see in schools is because of a lot of factors, including standardized tests, school becomes too focused on discrete skills. And so, as Maxine Green says here, is when the reward system of school is geared toward guaranteeing certain predefined performances or the mastery of discrete skills, teachers too often become trainers, drilling, imposing, inserting, testing, and controlling. They are too distant from their students to talk with them or to them. Instead, they talk at them, work on them very often, but not with them. And this is one of the things that I really wanted to disrupt as an educator. And I remember when I was still in the classroom teaching, in an elementary school classroom, I remember at times feeling like this was happening to me, where I was becoming so overwhelmed by the pressures related to standardized testing, or just overwhelmed by the many things that are happening in schools every day, and trying to figure that out, that I would stop being present to my students. And so one of the things I think about as a school leader is, how do I create a space and place where children and teachers can be present to one another, where everyone's experiencing the joy of learning, because people love to learn. If you think about your own self, reflect on a time where you really enjoyed learning, there was something about that. It might be something that you were really, really interested in. Maybe it was the people that you were learning with. But learning is fun, and we've got to make sure that that's happening in our schools. And sometimes the structures of schooling that have been around for many years, cause that joy to not be as present. And I think it's also really important to think about the fact that, also for a lot of different reasons, there's sometimes this concern in schools related to just proficiency only. We got to make sure that everyone is, reading at a certain level. And while that's incredibly important, we want everybody to have access to powerful literacy. Sometimes we get so concerned with this proficiency idea that we're not really focused on the transformative possibilities of literacy. And so this is a quote from Catherine Au, who does a lot of work related to, like the title of her book here, she does a lot of work related to literacy, achievement, and diversity, and really thinking about how can we be sure that our school literacy practices are meeting the needs of the diverse students who are in our school buildings. And as this is a quote from Catherine Au, and this concern for proficiency, it sometimes overrides this concern for the transformative possibilities. And so sometimes the school literacy practices actually serve as instruments of control and disempowerment, and superseding and displacing the literacy practices of students, families, and communities. And so again, we have to really work to make sure this isn't happening, that instead we are really thinking about education for transformative purposes. And it's really important to think about too, that that the students who are often not being served as well as they should be, that they, students of color, students, second language learners, these are students that we absolutely need their voices, so that they can help shape our society, so that we're all better, so that we can all do and be better. And so we have to really think about, how do we make sure our school practices work for all students, and thinking about students of diverse backgrounds. So thinking about, how do we make sure our school spaces are set up in ways that students of color can be successful, as well as students who second language learners. So to disrupt the inequities, And that's why I'm going to move into like, okay, what can we do to disrupt these inequities? And I want to acknowledge this is incredibly complex, and I'm going to share some ideas today, but it's just scratching the surface because this is so complex. But one of the things we talk a lot about at AFIA is the importance of teaching academic skills through intellectual pursuits. And that is a quote from Lily Katz. I can't take credit for that, but I just love this idea of teaching academic skills through intellectual pursuits, because all of us, when we're intellectually engaged, we're learning. And so we have to make sure that our schools are, and teachers are learning, kids are learning. So we want to, from pre-K through 6th grade, that's because that's the grades we serve, we want to make sure our classrooms are intellectual spaces where students' questions are driving the learning, where the things that they care about are included in our curriculum. And so that includes our bringing our families and our community into the learning. It includes giving students opportunities to share what questions they have and making sure those questions drive the learning. I just heard a noise. Is everything okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, thanks.
You're good.
So thinking about disrupting those inequities, just ensuring that learning is joyful, active, addressing the whole child, and making sure that we're doing very intentional work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including to work to ensure that our staff reflects the student population. As I mentioned, 85% of our students are Black, and we work really hard to make sure that we have a teaching staff or whole school staff that represents our students, so that our students can see themselves in the people who are teaching them. So our teaching staff is about 40% Black, and we definitely always love to increase that. We want to work to ensure that every member of the community feels a sense of belonging, and we work to support social emotional learning as well as academic learning. So to really disrupt those inequities, we have to support the whole child. So that's thinking about social emotional, but also thinking about how do we accelerate academic learning in an authentic, meaningful context. So here are some beliefs that guide oh goodness, our work. It's a good, I can't believe I made that typo. But anyway, they guide our work. So we're just working to make sure that there's really respectful and trusting relationships between teacher and children, that children are the co-constructors of knowledge, that we are a constructivist school, which means that children are given opportunities to construct and be the co-constructor of knowledge. There's sometimes, if you think about this image of trying to dump knowledge into a child's head, that's certainly not going to work, that we really need to work with children to co-construct. Whoops. Children's questions should lead the inquiry. And children learn best when they have multiple ways to learn, express, and represent their knowledge. And so thinking about the arts integration and ensuring children have multiple ways to show what they know. Through the arts, children learn more deeply. They're able to engage in and process content in unique and personally meaningful ways. And then thinking about how do we empower children for the future through transformative learning. So at AFIA, we have a philosophical frame that we use to guide the learning that we do. And that includes the work that we do related to arts integration. And I'll tell you more about that here in a few minutes. As I mentioned, we are a constructivist program, which again, really means providing opportunities for students to construct their own understandings of the world through meaningful hands-on learning experiences. We're an inquiry-based program. We really want children's questions to lead the learning. We spend a lot of time focusing on social emotional learning. In this picture, you'll see two students are taking a few moments to breathe. We teach students about their brains. We teach students to understand that when we are in our flight or fright part of our brain that we're not able to do our best thinking. And so if we're really upset or really angry, that it's okay to have those emotions. We all have, we're human. We have lots of different emotions, but we need to acknowledge those emotions, and we have to think about how can we move into our thinking brain by, sometimes that's breathing. So it's, teaching students how to take good care of themselves, so that they're able to, be able to know how to handle big emotions when they hit us, because that does happen. And I know from my own experience as a child and in schools, oftentimes the schools, oftentimes the approach would be to just stop having that emotion. So if you're upset, just, the idea is, okay, you need to just stop being upset and get back to learning. Well, we understand that you can't just stop being upset when you're upset. You have to as humans, we have to learn how to name our emotions, how to work with our emotions, so that we can get to a place where we're able to do our best work. I know I've already mentioned that part of our philosophical frame is learning for transformative purposes. And then also we do have a focus on social justice as well. And I do want to just share a few things related to the power of learning through the arts, because one of the things that I've noticed as an educator is sometimes when children are not doing as well as we'd like for them to do in math and reading, for example, we do things in schools such as take out the arts, or when there's funding crises, we take out the arts because we stop spending money on the arts and just really spend money on academics only. Or, you'll sometimes in an elementary school, social studies is removed from the curriculum, or science is removed from the curriculum, because there's this pressure to raise reading and math scores, for example, or, there's lots of different reasons why this is happening. And actually, in my opinion, and there's research out there that backs that, actually doesn't help students do better in reading and math. Just spending more time doing math, of course, the more time you do something, the better you get at it. But if you're just learning math and reading in a decontextualized setting, where you don't have that intellectual engagement, you're not going to learn as high levels. And so this is like learning through the arts can really be beneficial to students for so many reasons, which is, why we are so committed to the arts and arts integration here at AFIA. But this particular study was I believe a 3-year study that took place in 10 schools. And some of the things that they found are that learning through the arts contributed to students' sense of self-efficacy, also contributed to increased self-esteem. Learning through the arts improved students' behavior, led to better attendance in school. We know that attendance is incredibly important because you have to be at school in order to engage in the learning that's happening at school. Lots of learning happens outside of school as well, and we want to acknowledge that, but we also want kids at school when we're having school. Learning through the arts also led to students increasing their scores on standardized tests. And also teachers felt a higher level of satisfaction, and they felt renewal. And they also felt more effective as they learned about their students through their artwork. They also noted that the relationships between the schools and the surrounding community was strengthened through learning through the arts. So this is a study that I'm highlighting, but I will say we've seen all of these things happen in our setting as well. And I think that it's really important to acknowledge that one of the things we talk a lot about is standardized tests are not the best way to show everything that a human can do and everything that a human knows. But we also know that in our current context, in our current situation, that standardized tests give people access to resources. So if you can take a standardized test well, you at this time in our society, you have a better chance of getting a scholarship, for example. And so we see it as a social justice issue to help support our students in being able to do well on standardized tests. And it's something that we're working on. And I know that Dr. Bedell was recently, well, I think it's been a few months since he participated in the forum, but he talked about that study from the St. Louis University, the PRIME report around high poverty schools who are showing high growth on standardized tests in the state of Missouri. And our school is one of the schools that was highlighted in that paper, and we were one of the 15 schools that were listed for both reading and math in terms of having high growth and high poverty schools. And so I share that to say that while our status scores are not where some people think they should be yet, or where we want them to be yet, we are seeing that students are growing, and we believe that the arts is absolutely contributing to that. And we see, you know, there's so many anecdotal stories I could share about students who, you know, struggled with having moments of causing disruption in classrooms, where through lots and lots of work, partnering with families, partnering with the child, that they were able to learn skills and strategies so that they were able to show growth in that area as well. And so all of these things that showed up in the study also show up in our school. And I know I've talked a little bit about our focus on social emotional learning. I'll just share that we do pull from conscious discipline. And if you are working with young kids in any capacity, conscious discipline is a great program to learn more about. Actually, it can also help you learn a lot about yourself as an adult, and think, there's lots that we can continue to learn in terms of our own social emotional growth. But just really helping students be able to manage emotions and behaviors to achieve their goals, being able to recognize their emotions and be able to name their own strengths, and then also their own challenges, and to have goals related to working on those challenges, working on social awareness, showing understanding and empathy for one another. We work really hard to build classroom communities where students know one another. The more we know one another, the kinder we are. So really creating positive, productive classroom communities, helping students to learn responsible decision making, and also learn relationship skills. As a school, we're very committed to social justice, and really want children to have the opportunity to have conversations and engage in learning related to complex topics, and certainly bringing in making sure that we are talking about race, making sure that we are ensuring that our students see themselves reflected in the books that are being used in classrooms, that our students are reflected in the curriculum, while also learning about people who are different than them. There's this researcher who talks about, I think it's Dr. Bishop, who talks about the importance of books being windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. And so children should be able to see themselves in books as mirrors, but they also should be able to learn about people who are different than them. And that's where it provides a window. And then a sliding glass door is also that idea of, the transformative learning as well. Also thinking about taking advantage of all the great opportunities we have in Kansas City and partnering with various organizations for learning. And the reason I bring that up right now is because some of you might have seen the 30 Americans exhibit at the Nelson a few years ago. We made sure that some of our students were able to go experience that exhibit, because all of the artists were African American, and since most of our students are African American, we wanted them to be able to see art that was created by people who look like them, and they were really taken by and inspired by the Kehinde Wiley portraits, and so they created Kehinde Wiley inspired portraits. The image on the right, which I know not everybody can see, but I will mention that it's an image of the Statue of Liberty, and the students who created that image of the Statue of Liberty, they engaged in a project related to learning about truth. So our school is right on truth, and they engaged in some learning related to the truth divide, and really had lots of questions about why does this dividing line exist in our city. And they learned a lot about historical pieces about why the truce divide exists and what people are doing to make a difference and to change that about our city. And so they learned about redlining and all kinds of things that many adults don't necessarily know. And they also did some work related to our nation and ended up creating the Statue of Liberty. And they put the torch at her feet because they said that our country isn't quite where it needs to be. So we aspire to be a place where everybody has equal opportunity, and they said that we're not quite there yet. And so that's why they put the torch at the Statue of Liberty's feet. But they did talk about too that we can get there and learned a little bit and shared ideas. They actually did a lot of research that they presented. They were fourth graders when they did this, and they did research about various things in Kansas City and beyond, and they shared that research with community members. So we had community members from across Kansas City come in to see the fourth graders' presentations about the truce divide, and some of the adults who came in for these presentations said that they learned a lot from our students. So I'll talk a little bit about our approach to arts integration, because I just want to acknowledge because oftentimes people ask me, well, what does that mean? What does it mean that you integrate the arts? And so we use the Kennedy Center definition of arts integration, and it is and I'm just going to read this because I think that it is such an important definition to be aware of. Arts integration is an approach to teaching in which students construct and demonstrate understanding through an art form. Students engage in a creative process which connects an art form and another subject area and meets evolving objectives in both. So students learn the academic content. They also learn they learn, for example, if they're engaging in dance, they're learning about dance. And then they construct their understandings through that art form, so that they're able to deepen their learning in the academic content as well as the art form. One of the things that we know is that art is, as mentioned here as well, art is fundamental to human expression. And so I think particularly with everything that's happened in the past couple of years, I feel like learning through the arts is more important than ever. I can show a few examples or I can talk through a few examples of this as well. So this is a very short video that I'm going to show, and it just is an example of first graders who had engaged in a learning project related to the life cycle of plants. They, throughout that project, used dance to represent the life cycle of plants, and then they performed this, and it's very short. And we'll see if it's going to work for us. If not, we'll just keep going. The students started out as a seed, and now they're coming through the soil to grow. The students representing the stem and various parts of the plant. Oh, whoops. Let's see. Okay, here's another project that's a great example of arts integration. This is the Changemaker project, and this was a second grade project. And in this project, students learned about people. They chose people who they considered change makers, people who made a difference in the world. And they researched and learned about those folks during writing and reading workshop. They also wrote essays about the individuals that they researched, and then they learned about the art of collage, and they created some collages to help them learn about the art of collage. And they took what they learned about the art of collage to create these beautiful collage portraits of the people that they researched. And they also had a gallery walk, so families could come in and see the art that they created. It's really important for us that our students have opportunities to share their learning with the community. I mentioned, with the Truce Divide project, people came in and saw the students learning. That helps make the learning more meaningful, because when we're sharing what we've learned with our families, with other community members, it helps us see the relevance of our learning. It also helps us become more proud of our learning. Our self-confidence increases. All of those things are so important. And also through this project, students worked in groups, and so they also had to know how to work with one another. They had to maneuver. We all know it can be, sometimes it's easier to do, sometimes we think it's easier to do things by ourselves, but really we know that we can get to a better result when we work with other people. And so they had that opportunity to work with other people and create these beautiful portrait collages. We also use a specific, I know I've mentioned projects a lot. We do use a specific approach to projects, which is called the project approach. In this picture here, you'll see that students are working on creating garden beds in front of our building. They were doing a plant project, and they worked with the Kansas City Community Gardens to build garden beds in front of our school. And so they had the opportunity to improve our school, as well as learn about gardens and plants, and they also were able to partner with a local organization. We want opportunities for students in classrooms to have hands-on experiences and to investigate. Teachers create provocations to really get children thinking, to help them generate questions that they can then use those questions for their learning. We also bring in field experts and also very much value field trips. And so we know that learning doesn't just happen in a classroom. Learning happens outside of the classroom. Learning doesn't just happen with your teacher. We want to bring in experts from the community. And so in the examples you see here, students were, in one picture, they were engaging in a cooking project. And so somebody came in from, I think, harvesters to cook with the children. And then in the other photo, students, there was a big hole on Troost when there was some sewer work happening in Kansas City. There was, I mean, I think there's probably still is, but there was a lot of work happening with replacing some pipes and various things in front of our school, and the kids saw this big hole in front of the school and had lots of questions about it. It was on the anyway, they had lots of questions about it, and including the fact that it caused them to wonder, because there was some water in the hole. It was a huge construction project with and they noticed that the water that they could see was dirty. And so they started asking questions like, how do we get clean water out of our sink when we turn it on? How does that happen? What is that process? And so the teacher took advantage of this for a project, and the students learned a lot about how we get our water in Kansas City, how the water is cleaned, how it is filtered. They created filtration systems. Somebody came in, a field expert from the Kansas City water department came and talked with the students. And in this picture, they are doing a cleaning up around the school, because one of the things that they learned is that when people litter, that can end up in our water system, and it also can end up in our rivers, and the trash can be then carried to the ocean. And so the kids learned all about this, and we're very invested in cleaning up the trash around our school to keep it from going into this into our water system. As I've mentioned, students represent their learning in a lot of various ways through the arts. And I'm going to show you an example of a first grade classroom who they were engaged in a music project. And they had a lot of questions about, well, how do people make money as musicians? And so because of that, the teacher brought in field experts who could talk with them about what are all the different ways in which so I think she brought in somebody who produces music. She brought in somebody who is a musician, and the students became interested in writing their own song and producing a video. So I will share that with you. And I think we're getting close to the time when we get to transition to questions. So I am noticing that as well, but I will show you this video of the students wrote the lyrics and then they created a storyboard before they turned it into a video. They did not write the music. What Not sure what happened there.
If you wanna be cool, ask this school. We think it's tight, so trick people right. At FIA, we go high when they go low. We reach for the sky. Every day we concentrate, so we can grow to be something great. We choose the thrill of the everyone, choosing love and to shine like the sun.
Here are some students planting in our garden beds. This is a different group of students than we saw earlier. So over the years, many different groups of students have been able to take advantage of the garden beds and learn about plants. And I am going to just share a little bit kind of where we're moving, and then then we can move into the question portion. But one of the things that I think is really important to think about for all of us as members of our city and country, that this model that we have in schools of one teacher with 22 kids or 23 kids or 24 kids, it's just not a really very realistic model in terms of making sure students are getting their needs met and making sure that it's a job that teachers can do. And as many of you or all of you might know, we are facing a teaching shortage. Part of the reason we are facing a teaching shortage is because we are asking educators to do the impossible at times. So if you have 24 children with every single person has unique needs. It's so important that children know that they matter each and every day. And with that many kids, it's hard to meet the needs. And so what we're really moving towards is a team teaching model at AFIA, which is a more expensive model. But we think it's really important we just need to bring in more human resources to better meet the needs of students. And we definitely see more social emotional needs now than we did before the pandemic. We saw a lot before the pandemic, but now we've seen increased needs. And we see increased academic needs. And so it's just really important for us to think about how do we creatively bring in more resources to meet the needs of students and also to make this profession more sustainable for the people who are working in schools each and every day. I could say a lot about that, but I will stop there because I know that wasn't, well, I trying to have a good concluding sentence, but that's a whole nother presentation. But I will stop for now.
Hey, well, thank you. Yes, we are listening to Tricia DeGraff. She's the executive director for the Academy for Integrated Arts, public charter school in South Kansas City. And so, yes, we will take a break before we go into questions and answers. We go to take up our collection. We'll notice about that. We need some help, of course, with some of the expenses, with the equipment and staffing. So I believe it'll be put in the chat. You'll get instructions how you can do it online. Just go to allsoulskc.org, and there are options there to donate. So we appreciate that. I also want to tell you that next week, we're going to have Dean Baker, the co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C. And he's going to talk about the economics of infectious diseases. So, all right, now we will be do questioning through Zoom style for those that are online. And we have a hand up. First up is Richard.
Thank you for being here. I was wondering, as you were talking, what your opinion is of the Don't Say Gay legislation that's coming out in certain states.
Well, it really concerns me. I think that when we talk about making sure our schools are a place where all students feel a sense of belonging, it's really important that we acknowledge students, making sure that our schools are safe places related to GLBTQ as well. And so I think it's very, very concerning, and it's very depressing, to be honest. I think that, like, schools have to be places that welcome and affirm all children and their families. And so I think it's problematic. I don't know if you want me to say more about it or not. But as a educator, as a parent, as a citizen, it's just really concerning to me, and some of the stuff that's happening in Texas right now. And then, of course, we have things we need to worry about in Missouri as well. But I don't know if you want me to say more or not.
Well, yeah.
Whatever you want to say, but thank you for that. I appreciate that comment.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we're working on as a school community is providing professional development and thinking about, making sure that we have books that reflect students' different family configurations, and books that represent, so that children that can see themselves in books. So a child who identifies as gay, or a child who identifies as or a transgender child can see themselves identified in books, can have an affirming space as well. I will say this is really complex, and because everybody is at different places in terms of I think there's a need for ongoing work for adults and children in terms of making sure that we're engaging in practices that ensure that everybody can feel a sense of belonging. And so I'll just say it's definitely a work in progress. And I have a child right now who's working, who's a high school student, and they're working with some of their other students in their school to create a professional development for teachers related to ensuring that the school is a place of belonging for GLBTQ students. So I think it's an ongoing, and I'm really proud of the student. These are high school students who are doing this, and I'm really proud of them for doing this, because they recognized it as something that needed some work in their school. And I know that as all schools, this is something we need to work on. So it's
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah.
Lon's got a okay. Lon's got a question. Hey, Lon, you got to unmute. Okay, Carol's got a question. Go ahead, Carol.
Okay. All right. Hi, Tricia.
Hi, Carol.
I volunteer at a Kansas City public school. I love your presentation. One of the things that I notice is there never seems to be enough time to get done what we need to get done. And I get to be the value added and redo some things that some students miss in the classroom. Does integrating learning with the arts always take more time? And I know it's deeper, but doesn't it take a lot of extra time?
It's a great question. I think that we never feel like we have enough time in schools. You're right. We never do. But I think that we have to really think about how are we spending our time? And we have to think about what's most high leverage, what's going to, so using the arts for learning makes it more joyful, makes it more engaging. And so that's a better way to spend our time than doing some of the things that we try to do sometimes that's not as engaging, that's not as joyful, is my quick answer to that. I also think that it takes time to help teachers develop the ability to integrate the arts. So we recognize that when we have a teacher who's new to our building, they're not going to integrate the arts necessarily as deep as somebody who's been doing it for 5 years, just because it takes time to learn these skills. But so yes, it does take more time, but I think it's worth the time. And it's a better use of our time is that so? Does that work, Carol?
That works. And again, I agree that that learning by doing something is a deeper learning, but setting it up, doing it, and reflecting it does take more time.
It does. It definitely does. But I also know that for our teachers, it's more engaging. I think that it's from a teacher perspective, it makes it more engaging for you as well. So yeah, thank you for that question. And thanks
Yeah,
for all the
Alice.
questions so far.
Okay. Alice, what's your question?
First of all, I really appreciate your enthusiasm, your holistic approach to education. What you could have said about mental health needs of the youth, you may want to connect with the Jackson County Mental Health Tax Fund or Tax Levy, and they provide mental health services in some of the middle schools. And they have innovative funding, so you might check it out, but it's a huge area, I know.
Thank you. Yes, and I didn't get into thinking about trauma-informed methods, which is something we definitely think about and are working to ensure that our staff has the training they need related to that as well. So thank you for sharing that. It's another time thing. There's,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm sorry. Lon, are you ready? You got a question?
Yes, and I'm no longer mute. What the question is what about special needs students, and do you have special education students and percentage of?
Yes. So we're at about 8% special education, I believe, at this time. It ranges from anywhere from 8 to, typically for us, anywhere from 8 to 12%, I believe. Yes, we have special education teachers. We often contract out with, for example, occupational therapy and physical therapy, just because as a small setting, we don't necessarily have the need for a full-time individuals in those roles, but people come to our building to provide those services. And if we have a student enrolled tomorrow that has an IEP with a different service that we're not providing, we would then provide that service. We would contract to make sure that happens. But we have full-time special education teachers, just the students. What the day looks like for students is just very much dependent on their individual education program. And so some students are spending, most of the day in a regular education classroom and getting some services as written in their IEP, and some students are spending more time with the special education teacher, just depending on their needs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Craig.
Hey, I've got two questions. One is relating to the school to prison pipeline. Are there any studies or documentation to show that programs like this, these type of educational programs, are having a positive effect in reducing that pipeline to the prisons? And the other question is, since you just talked about special ed, can you tell me what the ratio is of the learning disability students versus the behavioral disability students?
So for the first question, I'm sure there are studies, and I don't know what they are, immediately. I will say that definitely, we are a program that works really hard to not suspend children, because definitely research shows that there's higher rates of suspension for students of color, and that is problematic, and that's something that needs to be changed for sure. And we also know that suspension isn't, when a child makes a mistake, there's either missing skills or something underlying that's happening, and just punishing, you can't punish out. If somebody needs assistance, you can't just punish them and expect them to change their behavior. Like, that's just not how it works. Like, if a child needs to change their behavior, there needs to be partnership with families, there needs to be skill building, there needs to be problem solving, and just sending a kid home for 2 or 3 days, that's not the skill building that needs to happen. So I know that there's research out there that related to decreased suspensions being better for children. But I don't know that, I just don't know that I can't speak to it right now. But I know that that what, we have to really think about how do we make sure that we use restorative practices. That's something that's really important to us, using restorative, responsive practices so that we're helping children build skills so that they can, successfully navigate the world. The other question, I can't really answer that because because I just don't know enough to I think there's lots of different reasons why students have individual education programs, and I can't really speak to the details of that right now.
And what did you mean by restorative practices?
So things like there's for example, if a child does something to disrupt the classroom community and brings harm to the community, then there might be a restorative circle where oftentimes our assistant principal will lead something like a restorative circle with children who they are able to acknowledge what happened that shouldn't have happened, come up with a way, depending on what it is, they do something constructive to try to, you can't always fix, like when you make mistakes, you can't always exactly fix the mistakes, but you can think about what kinds of things can I do to make it better. And so just working to the restorative practices are related to how can we address what happened here in a positive and productive way that also will help us learn so we don't continue to do it.
Okay, Tricia, this is Joe. I had a quick question I want to ask. I was intrigued by you using your location on Troost Avenue as a basis for that study of the kids explorers and the racial history there. I'm wondering, do you feel insulated from the backlash going on right now about racial education, or are you concerned even there at your school?
I think it's concerning for sure. I mean, I think that I got a sunshine request. I'm not just me. School leaders across the whole state, we got sunshine requests at the beginning of the year where there was an organization that wanted us to share every single lesson plan document that included, they had a list of 70 terms, things like if it had the word racist in it, if it had the word whiteness in it, if it had, they had 70 different terms. And so I definitely feel concerned about it. And I felt like, for example, in the example I just shared, I felt like, we don't have time to go hunt down every single thing that we have in writing in our building or every single lesson plan because yes, race is a part of what we teach. Our children are Black or many of our children, not all of our children, but many of our children are Black, and race is going to be a part of, it's a part of our history. It's a part of our world. It's a part of it's a part of everything around us. So it is going to be a part of the curriculum. And so, I definitely think that, so the sunshine request was frustrating because I thought we're trying to get through a pandemic. We're trying to make sure we can bring kids safely to school. And then people are asking us to produce all these things for them. So I think that, there is this I definitely think it's worrisome because there are individuals out there that for whatever reason don't want us to include parts of our history and parts of our society in our instruction. And it's an important part of our world. And so, yeah, I definitely feel worried about it. And think that we have to, yeah.
Right. And arts would be a great way to explore all the same topics.
Yes, absolutely.
And another question, when did you personally attach yourself to an art-focused education? Was it before you came to FE, or when and how did you make that art connection?
It's a great question. Because it really became for me much stronger when I started working at Academy for Integrated Arts. But when I was at, so one of the things I think about is I've definitely been interested in teaching through projects for many years. And when you see great examples of project work in schools, you always see great examples of the arts. Because oftentimes when students are engaging in deep project work, they're representing their learning through the arts, whether that's through visual arts or creating skits or graphic design because they create a brochure, but writing songs. So project work often includes the arts. I've learned a lot more about arts integration since taking this job 8 years ago, and I did, when I was at UMKC, I did teach a course that was it was an integrated literacy, social studies, and arts integration course. So I had, that's something that had been a part of what I was doing before AFIA, but my own knowledge has deepened and my own commitment has deepened since I came to AFIA, for sure.
And do you remember at any particular moment when it really clicked for you, when you thought, yes, that this arts is the way to go?
I think it's just over time. I don't think of a one specific moment. I just think over time it just becomes deeper as you see students, their pride, their engagement, their like when they, people teach, whenever teachers take our kids to Nelson, they'll often come back and tell me, the docent said our kids asked such great questions. They said they couldn't believe the level of questions the kids asked. And those are the moments where it's like it feels affirming, because it's like, if people are noticing that our kids can ask really deep questions because of this work they do, that's affirmation. So I can think of moments where I've been affirmed, but I can't think of like a moment when it just was like, okay, this is it. Like, it's just kind of like over time it gets deeper. So I hadn't really thought about just a specific moment, but definitely there's lots of things that happen to affirm the importance of it.
Okay, we've been listening to Tricia DeGraff, the Executive Director of the Academy for Integrated Arts, public charter school in Kansas City. Thank you, Tricia, for sharing with us today. And I want to remind everyone, next week we'll have Dean Baker on the All Souls Community Forum, and he is the co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington, D.C., and he's going to talk on the economics of infectious diseases. So once again, though, thank you very much, Tricia. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.